Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Mary Hunt at WATER in Silver Spring, Maryland, and I'm with my colleagues Diane New and Annalie Martin. We're in the WATER office. The WATER office is open normally Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday in these pandemic times. We're at home working on Monday and Friday, but we're in the office together usually Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I want to welcome all of you, and in a special way, I want to welcome those who are facilitating our program today, who are from George Mason University, and I'll talk about them in a moment. I want to hope that each and every one of you is healthy and has had a good, maybe a bit of a spring break, whether you celebrated Passover or Easter or whatever else you're celebrating. We hope that it was a renewing and refreshing time for you and your families. We have here on Tuesday, April 6th, 2021, the opportunity to meet with some graduate students from George Mason University during our water tea time. And the water tea is really meant to be kind of a hybrid experience, not to take away from the water meditation, which we will have next week, or from the water talk, which we will also have next week, which are kind of two ends of the spectrum. The water talk being a more intellectual project, the water meditation obviously being a time for contemplation, and then we'll have the water liturgy, which is a time for spirituality. But the water tea is really a time to be together with people from different parts of the world and different ways of life and ways of looking at things, and a time to share conversations. So this is something we've created during the COVID time, and it's been very popular. So I want to welcome our friends from the George Mason University Facilitation Skills class at the Carter Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And I want to give a special welcome to them because they have brought us something that I think will be very interesting to all of us. And I assured them that we were here, all ears ready to listen. And I want to begin by thanking Laura Carr-Pries, who was our water staff person last year at the beginning of COVID. And she has connected with her colleagues in this facilitation skills class about creating brave spaces and having hard conversations, the ones that we tend to avoid. And I think what our colleagues will teach us today are ways to learn about how to talk about these things that are difficult. We're not going to accomplish it all in an hour, but we're certainly going to get some hints and glimpses, maybe some tips on how we might in our everyday lives bring to bear some of the things that they're learning in their class. And I really welcome that, because so many times I particularly, and I know all of you are faced with situations where people are inviting us or otherwise getting us into conversations that are difficult. And we can all use some new skills and practice in how to cope with those. Water programs, just so you know, and especially for those who are new to our program today, are aimed at supporting and igniting social change. Whether in theology, ethics, or ritual, WATER's efforts are geared to bring together solid academic scholarly data with the activist commitments of the people who are part of our alliance. So it's really this two-pronged approach. Laura and her colleagues are taking a class in which they're learning how to facilitate these kinds of delicate, often uncomfortable, but oh so necessary conversations. This, when Laura asked me about it, resonates so well with our efforts to open spaces for dialogue and to include with attention to the priority needs of those who have been marginalized. And so what I'll do today is simply introduce Laura, who will introduce her colleagues, and then they will take over the program. They'll lead us both in the theory and practice of brave conversations, and we'll have several chances to speak with one another in small groups. And then at the end, we'll have some discussion and summarizing remarks. We will close officially, as we always do, at 3 o'clock Eastern time in the US, though the Zoom link will stay open for conversation, or if people want to ask further questions, something you might not have had an opportunity to probe while we were in full session. But we want people to know that this program is 1 hour and it will be complete at the top of the hour so that you can plan your schedule accordingly. The video of this session will be on our website at www.waterwomensalliance.org, along with some notes. So you don't have to worry about if you miss terms or spellings. Laura and her colleagues will have a chance to look over the notes before we publish them and make any changes. So just relax and prepare to learn. Let me introduce Laura, and then Laura, it will be all yours. Laura came to WATER last year, several months before COVID. She was in the office, of course, and was a wonderful colleague. But when the Mennonite Voluntary Service closed its Washington, D.C. house for health reasons, she went home to Waterloo, Ontario, where she continued to work with us throughout the summer before starting this graduate program at George Mason University at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution, concentrating as she is on social justice and peace building. And I was so delighted, Laura, when you got in touch and said, would you ever consider this? Because you knew water well enough to know that of course we would consider it. It's exactly the kind of work that we think is important, and the empowerment of women like you and your colleagues is something to which we are also committed. So with that, I want to thank you, turn the program over to you, and to welcome Tammie and Damaris and Biqiao to our tea, and to invite you to welcome them with the short introductions and then begin your program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary, for that kind, warm welcome. It is so wonderful to be back with water and see a lot of familiar faces. So just to get started, I'm going to introduce my fellow peers, colleagues to you all. So Damaris, if you want to just give a wave, Damaris is a second-year dual master's candidate in the School of Social Work and Conflict Analysis and Resolution. Damaris currently works at George Mason's New Student and Family Programs, where she plans extended orientations for incoming freshmen. Damaris also works part-time at Artemis House, Fairfax County's only 24-hour emergency shelter for domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, and stalking. Damaris hopes to open her own clinical practice one day with a portion dedicated to serving undocumented immigrants. Biqiao is a first-year graduate student in the Jimmy and Rosalind Carter School of Peace and Conflict Studies. Biqiao has lived in China, England, and the United States growing up. So coming from a multicultural background, she is passionate about bridging Eastern and Western cultures and exploring the concept of identity and overcoming differences and resolving conflict. And finally, I want to introduce Tammie. Tammie is a first-year graduate student pursuing her second master's degree through the Carter School. As a teacher and a citizen of the world, learning how to communicate effectively and creating safe spaces for communication has been a driving force in Tammie's 28 years in education and community activism. So we are thrilled that we get the chance to be here with you today. And we want to explore how it is to have challenging conversations, both in the highly polarized context we find ourselves in, and how to talk about challenging topics. We want to enter into this today by thinking about and exploring the identities, the multiple identities we all hold. Our personal identities often come into play during hard conversations. They may feel restricted, or we may feel limited to express certain pieces of how we identify. So we want to explore the multiple identities that we all hold as a way to consider how we enter into these conversations and how pieces of our identity contribute to these conversations. As we have this conversation on political conversations and identity, we want to create a brave space together. The concept of a brave space comes out of the field of social work as an alternative to the concept of safe space. It's an attempt to realize that challenging conversations won't be safe. There will always be an element of risk and challenge that will lead to some level of discomfort. And safety doesn't necessarily fit into that concept of challenge and discomfort. So rather than creating a safe space for today's tea, we invite you to this brave space. We acknowledge that the conversation may be uncomfortable at parts. It may challenge you or, challenge you in some way. But we hope that the challenge, and if you choose to enter into a risky conversation, that it comes from a place of mutual respect for one another and learning. So we hope that we can create a brave space to have a conversation about these hard conversations and to consider about how these conversations impact us all personally. So just to briefly what we're going to do today, we are going to work through an activity together, which Biqiao will explain in a moment. And we'll talk about it and work through it together and have 2 separate breakout rooms and come back and talk as a large group. If you have questions at any point, feel free to ask us for clarity. And for discussion, which we will prompt, you can raise your hand the Zoom way by clicking on reactions and then raise hand underneath. If you can't find that button, you could wave your hand in the screen, unmute yourself, or if you have other questions or comments as we go through, feel free to use the chat as well, and we will be keeping an eye on that. So we're excited for this, and I will turn it over to Biqiao now.
Thank you, Laura. So what I would like to do next is ask everyone to make a list of words to describe how you identify. Don't worry too much. We're looking for a list around 6 to 8 words. Don't worry too much if you're having a hard time coming up with the full list. I know that this could be a challenging task. And if you happen to have just an outpour of all the things you would like to put down about yourself, then that's great. You definitely don't need to stop at 8. So for now, I'm going to give everyone 3 minutes just to kind of take a crack at it. And once you're done, we'll be putting everyone into small groups so you can have a discussion on what things you have decided to put down. Okay, so hopefully everyone has thought of some things. Now Laura is going to put everyone into small breakout rooms. You'll be joined with, I think around 2 or 3 of your peers. So we would love for you to have just a very quick discussion on what things you put down and share these lists with each other. And as you are doing that, there are some questions for you to consider going into this discussion. In this process, was there anything you were surprised by as you were writing down your list? And was there anything you found particularly difficult? And it could be, as you were trying to think of words to write, or it could be, something you discovered during the discussion if certain things were particularly hard to share.
Great. So I wanted to let you guys know that we really appreciate you guys sharing your identity with your peers, and we just wanted to have a little discussion around the first part of this activity. And you can just, once again, raise your hand in the reactions, or physically raise your hands, and then we can call on you guys. But the first question we wanted to pose to the group is, in this process, was there anything you were surprised by when you guys were making your list of identities?
I see Dina has raised her hand.
Hi. Hi, ladies. Thank you so much for this time. Kitty and I were talking, and what surprised me was the tension between the harder parts of our identity and the more pro-social ones. It tends to cause me to doubt sometimes in those more positive identities. For example, being a trauma survivor can be very depleting. And so thinking of myself in the more positive pro-social things of being a minister in process and a mother, sometimes that can cause doubt. So I'm curious about what can we do to bring integration to those more challenging parts of our identity with the more positive, what we would call more positive ones. Keep going.
That's a really great point, Dana. That's really, really good. And it's about, I think, us looking for more digestible ways of expressing who we are to tamp down some things. Anyone else want to comment on that? I think I see Janet's hand is up.
Yeah, I had a different thing that intrigued me.
Yes, go,
So
please.
I'll wait until.
No,
okay.
Free.
I just noticed, and I didn't put it in my list, and the others in my group didn't either, but we're all white, and it says, how do you identify? I didn't put down as white, and I'm thinking that must indicate that, it's something that's really critical in this society we live in, ethnic society we live in, but I never thought about that, which indicates the culture that I'm from. And I mean, you understand what I'm saying. All of us are grown up as white women, and that changes how we see the world, I think.
Oh, definitely. You made a very valid point. And it's interesting that you didn't choose race initially, because we have so many different identities, social and ethnicities. So that's fabulous. Anybody else want to share? Thank you so much, Janet. I see another hand has popped up. Bella.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, kind of going off of Janet's point, another, for me, aspect of my identity when I was writing them down, I was kind of going off what do I feel like is, the most important to me. So first I put down as a woman, and I was in a discussion with Mary and Ruth, who also had that as, one of their like primary identities. The second one for me, I put down biracial. I'm half Chinese, half Italian, and that definitely, especially now, has really primed the way that I interact with the world and I understand people and their experiences. And I'm pretty young. I'm a sophomore in undergraduate school, so I've done a lot of discussions and workshops about, what's your identity? And a lot of the times they're like in a little chart, and you have to put like a word for each one of 5 different categories. And oftentimes sexuality is on that chart. And we were discussing, like, for me, I identify as heterosexual, but it's not because it's kind of the majority what's accepted in America, at least in society or whatever. I didn't feel like it was something that was a huge part of my identity, even though it is a way that I identify. So I left it out. But we were just talking about how that aspect of our identity kind of slipped our mind for this particular conversation. Whereas in other conversations, maybe that are more centered around, sexuality, or if it's like being hosted by like a queer LGBTQIA organization, that would be a more present, identity for me to describe and share. So that was another thing that we discussed and found very interesting.
That's excellent. That's a really good point, because our environments and the settings that we're in, sometimes we feel like dictate how we're going to identify ourselves. And that's really a critical piece in understanding how to communicate. That's outstanding. Do we have anybody else who'd like to share? Thank you so much, Bella. That was really great. Anyone else who wants to share? Anybody waving at us? Even if you
Anne-Marie,
can't.
had you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was surprised that I put 2 words down, rebel and heretic. And I put Catholic down too, so I guess I'm a rebellious heretic Catholic. And I'm going off Bella's thing. I think even though I put down my sexual orientation, I didn't share that. And so I guess that's not something with a group of people that I barely know I want to put out first.
That's very powerful. That is. And it's interesting that we all seem to have that commonality when we're trying to learn about brave spaces. What really are we willing to share initially about who we are and how we identify ourselves on personal levels and our social identities, because those help shape all of our attitudes and behaviors and things. So that's an excellent point, Anne-Marie. Excellent. I like the way you identified yourself as well. Yes, good. Anyone else? Okay, well, in that case, then we're going to go ahead and move on. And now, through a little self-exploration that you guys did, and you did an outstanding job with that, you've generated your first list of identities. Self-exploration is central to our growth as individuals, our relationships with others, and our ability to promote equity. Our various personal and social identities, as I mentioned earlier, are important aspects of ourselves that shape our attitudes and behaviors and worldviews and experiences. As we move into our next breakout rooms, you're going to try to narrow your list to what you believe are your 1 or 2 core identities, the ones from which all the rest of your identities stem from, or simply the ones you feel most connected to at this stage of your life. Now, by no means are we asking you to discard your other identities. They are all important to who you are. We also realize that this may not be an easy process, and everyone may not be able to narrow the list down to only 1 or 2 choices. But the internal exploration of your core identity and the external expression of those choices can provide valuable insight into your perception of who you believe yourself to be. As we work to create and participate in diverse and democratic environments, we need to understand how our own and others' identities affect our lives and our interactions with each other. So this time, you'll have 8 minutes in the breakout room to respond to the prompt. If you could only pick one or two of the identities, which would you choose and why?
Yes, and just to hammer this home, like Tammie has already said, the purpose of this exercise is in no way abandoning or disregarding your other identities that you don't end up choosing. And in fact, I think the aversion you may feel to crossing something off your list, the resistance we have to relinquish certain parts of our identities is as much part of us as the identities themselves. And our attachment to these words that we let define us can be what make us vulnerable, and it introduces conflicts into our lives. But I think that ultimately help us to create a brave space. And now we will put you into the breakout rooms.
I think we're mostly all back now. I hope that you had some enriching conversations in your group and found ways to create these brave spaces together. So we're going to continue these conversations as a large group. And just as a reminder, because this is such a rich topic and we have limited time, a reminder that the chat box is there as well if you have things that you'd like to say and add in or chime in, build off of. It's there to contribute as well. So some initial questions for you. What did you notice in your group as you were reducing these lists and talking together? Did you find anything challenging? Ella?
Hi again. So I was speaking with Diane, and she identified as a healer, which I thought was really beautiful. I hadn't, I thought about that as an identity. I thought it was really amazing how much of her life and her life's passions and her life work fell under this umbrella of, wanting to be a healer. And then when I shared that my two words were both identified as like a woman and an advocate, she shared with me that, she has like a huge part of her identity as well as being a feminist. And I didn't get the chance to share this with her before we came back here, but something I wanted to touch on was I feel like, being a feminist also falls under being a healer, like listening to, women's stories, advocating for them, trying to promote, not like themes or characteristics, but kind of the principles of feminism in all aspects of life, not just in one situation. I remember when I first was introduced to WATER, I was reading the mission statement, and I loved how you guys take themes from womanism and feminism and try to apply them into so many different, like global issues, national issues, racial issues, just, everything, just like using those principles to guide your life and guide how you walk through the world. So I thought that was very beautiful. Kind of going back to, and pardon me if I pronounce your name wrong, but Biqiao was saying like this one identity that you choose, it's not to say that the other identities don't matter. It's just, that's the one maybe just in this present moment that you feel the most connected with. And I thought that was really beautiful.
That's wonderful. I love how you've gone past the normal parameters of identity and really enriched the concept itself. That's wonderful. Rosemary says, I discovered that my main identity changes with the lifespan. Now I'm more conscious of my bereavements. And that's an interesting concept, as well as how our identities change over time, how we evolve. Thank you so much, Rosemary. That was a really great point. Anyone else like to share?
I just want to touch really quickly on Rosemary's comment. I also feel that deeply. In fact, I think identity really is a fluid concept. It's not something that is embedded in stone. You know, we put people in these different boxes, you know, so-and-so is white, so-and-so is Asian. It really is a fluid concept, and ultimately we ourselves can identify ourselves as, you know, as a healer, as a rebel. And that's just something I think really beautiful about the way we think and how we place ourselves in the world.
Ella, when you were talking, I heard you share about that process of the back and forth that you had with Diane and other group members. So I'm curious about the rest of you. What was your experience like to share your own identity or to hear others? How did that impact your own sense of identity, or did it raise other questions for you?
Mary has her hand up.
Thank you. I was very struck in our group by the fact that others' identities were so much influenced by recent events in their lives, that their identities were selected in part because the circumstances around them had changed. And they were able to then choose that identity, whereas 5 years ago, perhaps living in a different place or at a different time, that would not have been the key identity. So a lot of it is determined from outside of ourselves, I think.
That's a great point. We evolve over time, and therefore it's a good sign when we see that our identities are doing the same thing. We shift. It's a sign of growth. Okay, I see, ooh, chat is populating. Great. Kirby says the two that I chose were Black women, which are really intertwined. So while those identities show up and may evolve over time, they will always be, their essence won't change. That's a good point. When we talk about racial identities, that's an outstanding point right there. There's some of our identities that won't change. It's like being alive. You know, you can't change that part of you. But I think conceptually, there are some things that can shift. Outstanding.
Now may be a good time to pivot towards difficult conversations and why we decided to use this exercise. So having difficult conversations, they're usually difficult because of contentious content. The topic usually exposes some type of vulnerability that we're not willing to share with other people. There are heightened feelings involved, and they potentially challenge our deep-held identities. And that's why we decided to start with identity for our conversation today. So having a conversation about our personal identities, or having a conversation about identities or having our identities challenged, I think that could be one of the most difficult conversations one could have. Conflicts have the potential to challenge our sense of self and to challenge our own sense of legitimacy. And identity really is the deepest level of that we can really explore. And when conflicts get at this core of who we are, the ability to have a conversation about our identity navigates these waters. And by having this conversation today, and by the way, I am so impressed with everyone, with how thoughtful everyone is. So by getting at this deep level, we hope to build our capacity to navigate these difficult conversations, conflicts, and interpersonal relationships. And so I'm curious if you have found a role that identity may have played in a conflict that you've experienced.
That's a tough question. May take a moment.
I see that Cynthia has a hand up.
My first reaction to that was, I was an engineer working for the Department of Army for 35 years. There was an identity conflict because a woman in that position was, you know, dramatically unpleasant. But that's, to me, history. You know, it's interesting because I didn't even put engineer, you know, in my identity because it isn't anymore. Now I'm retired. It's like I fluffed off that struggle of maintaining my space in that situation. And so I feel like that happens, that in a particular environment, your identity may be something you have to fight, you know, and then you can walk away from it and be somewhere else. And anyway, so it was easy for me to think of that particular instance, but it's history for me. And I'm so happy about that.
Wow, that's great. And you know, you guys are in the chat and you really are giving us some powerful feedback about the question itself. Dina had a really thought-provoking and powerful statement about academia and religion and elitism, you know, the contentious conversations that we have and how those things have impacted her life, how she identifies herself. You know, these are some powerful statements, and we thank you for being so brave to share these thoughts and how identity is an integral part of our existence and in each of the components of our lives.
The next thing that I would like to ask everyone to consider is, were there, based on your conversations in the group and this conversation that we've been having, do you have any ideas on how we can create a brave space moving forward? Bella?
Sorry if I'm speaking too much, but I just had a quick thought. I'm taking a class right now called Religion and Disability, and one of our most recent units was healing. And I really think from that unit, I have been thinking a lot about, like, we feel confident in being brave when we feel we have support. So for instance, in this conversation, even before we started talking about all these things, I right away felt very supported. I felt safe. I know we don't want this to be like a safe space, but not even in that sense. Like, I knew that whatever I was saying, like, it was a dialogue. You know, people were ready to listen to me, even if they might not agree with me. And in that sense, I felt like I could be brave to speak my mind. So yeah, I just think that's a really important part of, you know, being brave, like knowing that you have someone that has your back, like no matter what. And oftentimes when we don't have that is when we feel, you know, the most unstable. When we feel ungrounded is when we feel unheard or unseen. So to have a safe space, I think it's really important to show genuine support and care and love for one another. And, you know, even in a Zoom context, I feel it translated in this space. So yeah, I just think that's an important aspect of being brave.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing.
But we really appreciate everyone showing up for our facilitation regarding your identities. And I know it can, as my colleagues have stated, can be a very difficult conversation and difficult to think through. So we really appreciate you guys engaging with us and helping us learn how to facilitate a group as well as students. So one exit question that we just want you guys to consider, and you guys don't have to answer, it's just for you guys to take with you. What did you learn about your identity that you'd want to tell a younger woman or even a younger version of yourself? So that's just a thought, a food for thought to wrap up our facilitation. And once again, thank you for being here.
Yes. And again, we want to recognize everyone who participated today, even if you didn't have a chance to verbalize or didn't, you didn't raise your hand or were able to get into the chat quick enough. We realize that you participated in this, and that in and of itself is a major milestone and an outstanding accomplishment. So thank you so very much for that. You all participated in what Dina posted another comment in here that I thought was just really hit the nail on the head. And I'm trying to go back to it. I'm so sorry. It was terms of engagement for dialogue to learn people's stories and validate. And I think each of you participated in that type of process today. So you learned about each other and you were able to validate each other, which made this a brave space and a safe space, as Bella pointed out. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you very much on behalf of WATER. Thank you to Laura and to Biqiao and to Damaris and to Tammie, and thank your professors back at George Mason too, who've been teaching you something that is having great echo, I think, not only in this conversation, but I'm sure in other forms of the work that you're doing. We at WATER are very edified by your input, and we appreciate the fact that you're studying these issues so that we can be very conscious of them and move them along. We wish you all very well in your peacemaking, in your conflict resolution, and we're sure that what you're about and what you've invited us to join you in today will make a difference. So thank you so very, very kindly. And then in a more direct way to those who are regular WATER people, or even those who are first-time WATER people, I was thinking about the late great Mary Daly, who probably, if she had been here today, would have said, well, to be brave, you have to start braving. And it seems to me that, Mary Daly would have said that would have been, that's the way I'm saying it today, but that's what I think, kind of channeling Mary Daly, that to be brave, you have to practice braving. And I think that one of the things that I learned today, and I'm grateful to our colleagues from George Mason for, and particularly to Laura, is the recognition that we at WATER do try to engage and do regularly engage in brave conversations that are not easy. And I think we learn from each other, as I did today from the people I was in small groups with. We learn from each other what that means and what it takes to do it. And then the question is, how do we do it in other places as well? And that's the challenge that I think we go ahead with today. Not only what did we learn about our own identities, but what can we in fact now better prepared to understand ourselves do to create more and more spaces for more and more people to have the kinds of honest conversations that we sort of take for granted here, I think. I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, whether in the teas or after the meditation and in the liturgy and in the WATER talks, I think we're having these kinds of conversations a lot. And we haven't named some of these things that you've been helpful in pointing out to us today. So my deep thanks to each and every one for being involved and for being involved in something different. One of the insights that came from one of my small groups was a person said, during the pandemic, what we've learned is things that we didn't even try before, didn't even know we didn't know. And as much as the pandemic has caused havoc in the world, it has also, because it's taken place, she said very sagely, it has given us the opportunity to try new things and to think about things that we wouldn't have thought about before. And I think this is a good example of that. So many, many thanks. So again, with thanks to Laura and to Biqiao and to Damaris and to Tammie, I bid you adieu. I also welcome you to stay on, those who wish to chat. The Zoom will be open. But we're adjourned for today with gratitude to all and wishing you brave conversations. Thank you so much from WATER.